Hello everyone, this is Jonathan Little for PokerNews.com, and today I'm making a video where I show you perhaps my favorite type of bluff. Don't share this with anyone though, because I don't want anyone to know that this is my favorite type of bluff. This hand is actually from a satellite. It's a 5,000 euro buy-in satellite, which I eventually bubbled. We won't talk about that today. But we have 20 big blinds. I'm sorry, 25 big blinds. We're playing 400, 800. And we're nowhere near getting in the money at this point. I raised to 1,700 with 5-4 of hearts from the hijack seat, which is tight but standard. And it folds around to a good tag Russian guy, which usually makes me think that this player's pretty strong. He checks the flop, and I flop a gut shot straight draw and a bad flush draw, which is a very strong holding. With a 25 big blind stack, I'm usually happy getting it all in this scenario. You're not loving it because you will be against a better flush draw some portion of the time, or perhaps even just a random hand like ace-king that has you in, or even ace-10 that has you in marginal shape. But when you flop a strong draw, getting it in is usually the right play because typically you have fold equity. And if you have fold equity, you can steal the pot sometimes, which is always fantastic. So anyway, he checks. And I'm usually going to continuation bet this. If he has nothing, we want him to fold. Because notice, all of his nothing hands actually beat me at the moment. No matter what he has plenty of equity. And if your opponent has plenty of equity, you're always happy making him fold. So he checks. I bet 1,800. This is going to get him to fold out a lot of hands, perhaps like pocket 10s and worse. He's going to call with any jack. He's going to call with any ace. He probably doesn't have a 2 too often. And if he has a hand like 8-7, I don't really care if he folds. So I bet 1,800 into the 4,700 pot. And like I said, if he jams me, I'm going to call it off reluctantly. He calls though. So when he check calls the flop, he probably has an ace or a jack or a draw. He could stick around with a hand like king, queen, king 10, and queen 10, although I think that's somewhat unlikely, especially given I am somewhat short stacked in the satellite. So he checks turn, and I want to bet. Well, actually, you know what? I don't know if I need to bet. So you have to ask yourself, how would you play your top pairs? And the answer to that is I would probably check them. So if I would check my top pairs, checking behind will make my hand look a lot like either top pair or nothing, and it'll put my opponent in a pretty nasty spot on the river where he doesn't really know what to do. Also notice now on the turn, if he checks and I bet say 4,500 and he goes all in, I should probably find a snug fold because I'm just barely getting the right price to call. So given the exact stack sizes and all of my reasonable bet options, my bet size options, I think checking behind here may be best, even though we do have the nut low, or nearly nut low. Be careful that you do not look at this spot and think, yeah, obviously bet because I have the nut low. I think a lot of players find themselves in that scenario, but you have to realize that you want to play your bluffs like you play most of your value hands. And in this scenario, it's very hard for me to have pocket aces, pocket jacks, pocket 2s, and ace jack. It's a very, very small range. So if my turn value betting range is quite small, my turn bluffing range should also be quite small. I would reserve this bet for times where I can bet and fold to a shove. I don't want to bet with a hand like this because it has a ton of value, and I don't want to fold it to a shove. So anyway, river's an ace. Not particularly good for me. My opponent checks. When he checks, I think he does not have an ace. I think most people would bet an ace in the spot. And I decide to fire out 2,300 into the 8,300 pot. I love small bet sizings in spots like this, especially against good thinking players, because they are going to put me squarely on a hand that is trying to get called by junk. My opponent's going to be able to deduce that I probably have a hand like an ace or a jack or pocket kings or pocket queens and is trying to get thin value from a hand like king high, a bad jack, or a marginal pair. So if your opponent thinks you're trying to get value, they're either going to shove, which my opponent would be crazy to shove here because I could just have the ace and never fold. So if he can't really shove and he thinks I'm trying to get marginal value, assuming he's a good player, he's going to fold a lot of the time, way more often than you would think. And this bluff needs to work very, very rarely, about a fifth of the time, or fourth of the time, something like that. And I'm very confident it will work probably something like 50% of the time or more. So it may seem a little bit wild to bet such a small amount into a big pot, but if your opponent is a good hand reader and he's capable of thinking about the game, this is a great spot to bluff because now we have no equity. We have, stone nut low, well, nearly nut low, and everything my opponent has beats me. And I think he's going to be disciplined and good enough to make a relatively tight fold. So I like this bet size a lot. It doesn't have to work very often at all. And especially when the draws miss, you have to realize your opponent could just have a draw and he's going to fold to any bet. So especially when you lose to all the draws and your opponent realistically could have the draws, or at least some of the draws, like king high, like king queen, like I said, and also random flush draws, you really do want to take a small bet size. Because if you bet big, your opponent's never going to fold an ace, and he probably isn't going to fold a good jack, but he may start folding all the worst hands to any bet size. So this is a good example of a spot where you can really bet any size you want and get the job done. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, even though I said don't share it with your friends, feel free to. The best thing you can do to help me out is to share these videos and all of my other training materials at jonathanlittlepoker.com with your friends. So check it out. I hope you have the best luck possible this week, and be sure to come back next week for another hand video. Thanks for watching.